Hi, I'm Cynthia. And yes, my parents really did skip my wedding to attend my brother's dog's obedience school graduation. They didn't call, they didn't show, but they did livestream Bruno in a cap and gown while I walked myself down the aisle. They said I was too emotional, that dogs are loyal. Then they sent me a wedding gift from the dog. Ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by the people who raised you? To fund your own abandonment, then sit through a celebration where your absence is edited out of the family photo wall? This isn't just about a missed wedding. It's about who gets to matter and who's trained not to ask why. Want to know what I sent them back? The morning of my wedding, I woke up to soft light pouring through the curtains of the guest house we'd rented for the weekend. The air smelled faintly of lavender and damp grass, leftovers from last night's storm. Silas had already stepped out with his father for a walk around the property. I stayed behind, staring at my reflection in the mirror, rehearsing nothing, because everything I wanted to say had already been said. I thought today would be about presence, people showing up. It turned out to be a lesson in absence. At 9:43 a.m., while I was sipping lukewarm coffee in my robe, my phone buzzed with a message from Milas. "Sweetie, we're so sorry. Bruno has his graduation today. He's been working so hard. We'll make it up to you soon. Love, Mom and Dad." I blinked once, twice. The letters didn't rearrange themselves. I read it again and again until the words felt like sand in my mouth. Graduation. For the dog. My mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. I whispered to the empty room. They chose the dog. I didn't cry. Crying implies some reaction beyond disbelief. I just stopped breathing for a beat. Then, as if on autopilot, I turned off my phone, set its screen down on the nightstand, and went back to folding napkins. When Silas returned, he asked, "Still no RSVP?" I tried to laugh. Maybe they want to surprise me. You know, drama runs in the blood. He tilted his head, sensing more than I gave. But he didn't push. He just came behind me, pressed his hands lightly to my shoulders, and said, "We'll be okay. This day's about us." I nodded, but part of me had already detached. By 2 p.m., guests began arriving. The backyard was dressed in string lights, mismatched chairs, and the hum of acoustic guitars from the Bluetooth speaker Silas had rigged up. His parents greeted everyone like diplomats. Delora even made name tags with soft cursive handwriting. I spotted the ones labeled Parents of the Bride and felt something hollow twist in my chest. I asked Delora quietly if she could place a bouquet near those seats. I couldn't bring myself to say why. She didn't ask. At 3:30 p.m., I walked down the aisle. Alone. My best friend Marla had offered to escort me, but I refused. I wanted to own the walk, even if the space beside me felt like a canyon. Sunlight cut across the field in thin slants, catching the back of my dress, making it glow in a way I didn't feel. The two chairs, front row, center, sat untouched. Parents of the bride tags sat firmly in place. No one dared to sit there. The air around them felt sacred, or maybe cursed. Delora had moved a floral arrangement just enough to partially cover the tags, like she was shielding me from the truth everyone could still read. After the vows, when Silas and I turned to walk back down the aisle, I allowed myself a single glance over my shoulder. The chairs remained, unbothered, unoccupied. Symbols of a promise that was never made and never needed to be broken, because it had never existed in the first place. A cousin whispered too loudly behind me, "Maybe Bruno's valedictorian." It wasn't cruel, it was clueless, but that made it worse somehow. People around me smiled, clapped, snapped photos. Silas's hand gripped mine tighter, anchoring me, but the part of me that had once longed for my parents' approval had already begun to calcify. Later, during the toasts, Delora gave a quiet speech. Nothing dramatic, just warmth. Family isn't always who raised you, sometimes it's who lifts you. I thanked her with my eyes. Words felt like they'd betray the weight of the day. When the sun dipped below the trees, and the cake had been sliced, I went back out to the ceremony space. Alone. I stood in front of those chairs and looked at them like a crime scene. I didn't touch the tags. I didn't need to. That was the day I stopped waiting for them to show up. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the sunlight fade across those empty chairs. The music had quieted, guests drifting toward the reception tables, where fairy lights blinked like they were trying to make up for something. When Silas called my name gently from the edge of the lawn, I turned without a word. My heels crunched over the grass, and I walked back into celebration like I belonged to it. Like the silence hadn't already told me otherwise. Inside the reception tent, everything looked just as we'd planned. Simple, warm, intimate. Friends chatted, glasses clinked, someone's kid danced offbeat near the dessert table. I moved among them, smiling like a guest at someone else's event. My body moved out of instinct, stopping to greet old coworkers, thank Silas's college friends, pose for a few photos. Every time I passed the floral arch, my stomach tensed. There was no call, no voicemail, just absence, wearing perfume and lipstick like it meant nothing. Silas stayed near, never more than a few feet away. His eyes did most of the talking now. I could feel the unasked question behind every glance. "Are you okay?" And my unspoken answer? Later, Delora, ever the diplomat, quietly adjusted decorations, smoothed napkins, made people feel at ease without saying much. At one point, she handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "You're glowing, sweetheart." I nodded, grateful. She knew enough not to say more. Dinner arrived. We sat, laughed politely, shared memories with our friends. And then, without warning, Daria, my old college roommate, let out a low sound from her seat across the table. Her phone lit up. She tilted the screen toward me, like she wasn't sure I should see, but couldn't keep it to herself. It was a live stream. The title read, "Bruno's Big Day, Obedience School Grad." The video opened to a bright stage at a local pet school. A banner stretched across the back. "Congrats to our graduates." In the center, Bruno sat proudly in a tiny tuxedo-like harness, tongue hanging, tail wagging. There was Malis, front row, clapping like she was at a Broadway show. And Vernon, he was beaming. At one point, he leaned toward the camera and said, "He's our pride and joy." I stared at the screen. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. The entire table had gone quiet. Daria lowered the phone slowly, as if afraid it might bite her. I whispered, just loud enough for her and Silas to hear. "They didn't miss my wedding. They hosted another one, for someone with a tail." Silas placed a hand over mine under the table. No words, just that firm, grounding touch. Later, as we cut the cake, someone had left the live stream open on the corner of a side table. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, still paused on a frame where Malis was waving like she'd won a pageant. My fingers tightened on the cake knife. I handed the slice to Silas and muttered, "At least he sat when they asked." That night, after the last guest had gone and the lights had dimmed, I sat alone in our small rental kitchen, nursing a glass of leftover Prosecco and listening to the hum of the fridge. Silas had gone to shower. I stared at the counter where our wedding cards had begun to stack. My phone buzzed. A package would be delivered in the morning, it said. I almost forgot about it by dawn. But there it was, on the porch. A box wrapped in paper printed with cartoon bones and paw prints. I didn't open it immediately. I carried it to the kitchen, set it on the table, and stood for a moment. Then I peeled the paper back. Inside was a plush, squeaky toy, shaped like a heart. A rubber bone with gold foil around it, like a prize. And a card. The handwriting was Malis's. "Hope your marriage is as obedient as Bruno." From Bruno, I stared at the paw print. It was drawn like a child had done it. A little off-center, a little smug. This wasn't an afterthought. This had been planned. I closed the box slowly, carried it into the guest room, opened the drawer in the nightstand, and placed the card inside. I didn't speak. I didn't tell Silas. But something shifted then, not loudly, not dramatically. Like a crack in drywall that hadn't been there yesterday. That afternoon, I returned to the ceremony space behind the guest house. The chairs were still there, still marked, still watching. I picked up the 2 parents of the bride tags, walked them to the fire pit, and dropped them in. No ceremony, no words, just flame and paper. It wasn't that they forgot my wedding. They remembered something else more. The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains, painting faint shadows across the bedroom wall. I was already awake when the first bird call broke the silence. Silas was still asleep beside me, breathing steady. I stared at the ceiling, not thinking, not feeling, just floating in that gray space between numbness and recognition. I reached for my phone, half expecting a message. Nothing. Just notifications from guests tagging me in photos, congratulatory texts, and the now infamous Bruno graduation clip forwarded more times than I could count. A few taps brought up the video again. There he was, Bruno, in his miniature tuxedo, tail wagging on stage, while my parents clapped like he'd cured cancer. Vernon's voice still echoed in my head. He's our pride and joy. I closed the app, set the phone face down, and let out a slow exhale. That morning, I didn't feel like a newlywed. I felt like a wedding planner who forgot she was also the bride. While Silas made coffee downstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my old message thread with Colton. I hadn't looked at it in months. The last real conversation we had was 9 months ago, when Bruno had bitten the UPS guy and Colton had a meltdown in our group chat. "Dude's a mess," he wrote. "He flunked his last class. He's never going to get through this program." And me, in my infinite wisdom, or maybe just desperation, I replied, "I'll pay the deposit for Pine Ridge. It's supposed to be the best." His answer had come quickly. "Seriously? You'd do that?" I remembered how good it felt, like maybe I'd finally done something that made me more than background noise. A few hours later, Milas texted me directly. "You're so thoughtful. He's lucky to have a sister like you." I had believed it then. Believed that gesture meant something. That maybe I was finally earning a spot on the wall. Not a literal one, but the kind where people remember to show up for you. Now, staring at my bank app, I searched for the charge. There it was. Pine Ridge Obedience School, $750. Dated exactly 9 months ago. I took a screenshot, the corners of my mouth curling in disbelief. That's when it hit me. I hadn't just watched my parents skip my wedding. I had bankrolled the celebration they chose instead. I paid for my own erasure. The words spilled out before I realized I'd spoken them. I wandered down to the office, still in pajamas, barefoot. A drawer in the corner cabinet stuck when I pulled it, like it was resisting what I was about to find. Inside was a stack of unused thank you cards. White linen stock, gold trim. One envelope already sealed, addressed in Vernon's handwriting. I opened it. "Thanks for supporting Colton and Bruno. Couldn't have done it without you." No signature, no warmth, just a receipt in disguise. I sat in the armchair, the card resting on my lap like a verdict. They hadn't just chosen the dog. They'd used my money, my goodwill, my silence, and then they'd dressed it up with paw print wrapping paper and sent it back like a joke. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood up, went to the hallway closet, and pulled out a fresh journal. A simple one, black cover, no lines. I printed the Pine Ridge receipt and taped it inside the first page. Then I picked up a pen and wrote, "This is the cost of love, measured in obedience." I closed the journal, ran my hand across the cover once, and slid it into the drawer beside my wedding album. I thought I was invisible. Turns out I was indispensable, just silently. I didn't open the drawer again for the rest of the day. I just let it sit there, that journal pressed up against my wedding album like a wound sealed with tape. Silas noticed something in my quiet, but didn't press. We moved through the evening in choreographed silence. Dinner, dishes, a short walk, a shared blanket on the couch. Like nothing had changed, though everything had shifted just a degree off-center. The next morning, after he left for work, I stared at my phone longer than I meant to. My finger hovered over Milas's name. Part of me thought, don't do it, let them stay gone. But the part of me that still believed in some version of family, the kind that shows up eventually, dialed anyway. Vernon answered. His voice was as flat as old linoleum. Hello? Hi, I said. It's me. Silence. I was hoping to talk to Mom. Another pause. She's busy. What do you need? I just. I swallowed. I just wanted to ask. Why didn't you come? He didn't hesitate. We told you. Bruno had his graduation. You didn't think your daughter's wedding was more important than a dog learning to sit? I heard movement. Maybe him handing over the phone. Then Malis came on, her tone crisp, polished. Cynthia, sweetie. You know, dogs are loyal. They don't abandon family over drama. That was it. That one line. She delivered it like wisdom, like she was quoting scripture instead of hurling a brick. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I swallowed the breath I'd been holding, let it settle in my stomach like lead. She wasn't defending her choice, I would later write. She was insulting mine. I ended the call without another word. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went to the bookstore, shelved a few deliveries, answered customer questions on autopilot. Around noon, one of my regulars, an older woman named Marcy, came in looking for a gardening book. I handed it to her without looking up, but she paused, studied my face. Can I give you a piece of advice? She said gently. If someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I blinked. I didn't mean to intrude, she added, placing a wrinkled hand on mine. But sometimes it's not about fixing things. It's about recognizing they were never whole to begin with. Her words hit harder than I expected. A week passed. No follow-up calls, no apologies. Then a letter arrived. The envelope was addressed in Vernon's handwriting. The return address was theirs. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a folded typed note. No handwriting, no ink, no warmth. Cynthia, marriage, when rushed, is often a performance. We chose not to encourage spectacle. Hope you understand. No love, Dad. No mention of Silas. Just cold syntax and passive aggression dressed as concern. The letter was folded perfectly, like it had been done with a ruler. It felt less like communication and more like a cease and desist. I read it twice. Then again. There was no misunderstanding here. No room for interpretation. This wasn't distance. They were cutting me loose with surgical precision. I walked into the bedroom, opened the drawer, and took out the journal. I taped the letter on the opposite page of the obedience school receipt. Below it, I wrote, My wedding was a performance, but I was the only one who came with a script. They didn't miss my wedding. They dismantled it from afar. After taping that letter into the journal, I left it closed on the desk and stepped outside. The air had turned, no longer summer warm, but crisp with early fall. It smelled of drying leaves and something else, something sterile, like distance. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the usual sense. It had shifted into something colder, measured, like lining up dominoes with quiet precision, knowing exactly how they'll fall. The next morning, I called Colton. He picked up on the second ring. I could hear wind, birds, the unmistakable jingle of Bruno's leash. Hey, I said. He sounded casual. Yeah? You good now? I ignored the bait. I wanted to talk about the wedding. A pause. Look, I know things got messy, but, it's not like anyone died. Colton, I said, steady. You all didn't just miss the wedding. You ignored it, pretended it wasn't happening. He let out a small laugh, like I'd just accused him of stealing snacks from the fridge. You're being dramatic, Sin. It's just a wedding. Bruno's been training for months. Dad said it was fine. I stayed quiet. He added, Not everything revolves around you. There it was. The sentence that finally drew blood. Not everything. Just everything that didn't involve me. I could have hung up. But instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I hit back. You know what's funny? I said. My voice calm, deliberate. I paid for Bruno's training. That program you all were so proud of? The little tuxedo, the streamers, the pride and joy? That was me. I funded my own abandonment. His silence wasn't regret. It was surprise. "Why do you always keep score?" he muttered. I almost laughed. "Because someone has to. You all certainly don't." I ended the call without waiting for a reply. That afternoon, a text buzzed through from a family friend, someone who hadn't realized I'd been cut out. No caption, just a photo attachment. I opened it, expecting more wedding congratulations. Instead, I saw Bruno, graduation cap crooked, tongue lolling, surrounded by family. Vernon, Malis, Colton, even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone smiling, clapping. Behind them, a cake. "You did it, Bruno!" My stomach clenched, not in pain, but in clarity. The message that followed said, "Such a proud moment for your family. Sad you couldn't be there." I stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "I was never invited to Pride, just to Patience." I printed the photo at the shop, circled each face in red ink, one by one. Not with rage, with recognition. That night, I opened the journal again. On the left, my wedding photo, Silas holding my hand under the arch, his parents behind us, the two empty chairs barely visible. On the right, the graduation picture. One side full of people who chose me, the other people who forgot I existed. I taped the new photo in. Then I wrote beneath it, "Next time someone asks who raised me, I'll show them the silence. The first time I bled, I didn't scream. But this time, I answered." That night, sleep didn't come easy. I wasn't tossing and turning. I just lay there, still as stone, eyes open to the dark. My mind wasn't racing either. It was oddly quiet, like the room after a long conversation has ended. Everything had been said, even the unspeakable. In the morning, I didn't make coffee. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out an old white box I'd once used to store Christmas cards, and brought it to the desk. The air felt heavier around it, like it already knew what it was about to hold. I opened my drawer and removed the printout, the Pine Ridge receipt, folded it neatly, placed it inside. Then I wrote a note, plain as breath, and set it on top. "You raised a loyal dog. I raised myself. No venom, just fact." I taped the box shut, addressed it with their house number, no name, no return label, and placed it in the outgoing pile at the bookstore. No ceremony, no announcement, just motion. I didn't check for confirmation. I didn't ask if they got it. That was the point. Some things speak louder when you stop yelling. That evening, Silas returned from work and watched me as I watered the plants along our front porch. Something about my movements must have tipped him off. It wasn't grief anymore. It was purpose. After dinner, he handed me a leather-bound book. I paused, unsure if it was a gift or a gesture. It was both. "I had it made this week," he said, "just in case you wanted to keep it all in one place." Inside were printed screenshots, every text that stung, every image that bruised, the RSVP that never came, the stream from Bruno's graduation, my father's cold letter, my mother's dig about loyalty. I ran my fingers across the paper, tracing the edges of every moment I'd been told, directly or otherwise, that I wasn't enough. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," Silas said softly, "but if you ever do, you'll have your receipts." I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Instead, I hugged him. Longer than usual. Long enough to mean thank you. Long enough to mean I'm still here. That night, I placed the notebook beside our wedding album. They sat like siblings, one documenting what was built, the other what had tried to unravel it. On the cover, I wrote in silver ink, "This is why I chose peace." The next morning, I made a quiet list. I called my doctor, updated my emergency contact, removed their names from the records. Then I did the same with the bank, the insurance company, the pharmacy. Each call was its own kind of closure. No tears, no explanations, just formality. Some exits don't require slamming doors. Just a slow walk through them, head held high. In the afternoon, I went back to the porch, sat with a glass of tea, watched leaves fall without trying to catch them. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped painting over the rot. The leaves had just begun turning when I decided to go. The morning was crisp, the air humming with the scent of pine and damp concrete. I didn't tell Silas. I didn't need his opinion, or his comfort, or even his protection. I just needed to see for myself how far they'd taken the erasure. I didn't call. I didn't text. I pulled the old birthday card from my drawer, one I'd written for Melis 2 years ago and never sent. It still said, "Love you," in blue ink. I slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into my purse. Their house looked exactly the same. White siding, perfectly trimmed hedges, a seasonal wreath on the door. A facade of warmth layered over a hollow I knew too well. I rang the bell once, then twice. It was Milas who opened the door. She blinked, startled, but didn't step aside. "Cynthia," she said flatly, "we weren't expecting—" "I know." She hesitated, then motioned me in. "Vernon's out walking Bruno." Of course he was. I stepped into the living room. It smelled of potpourri and silence. Everything was clean, arranged, untouched. And then I saw it. The wall. It had grown. Where once there were a few framed photos, now stretched an entire gallery of memory curated by a mission. Colton as a toddler. Colton at graduation. Bruno wearing a party hat. A canvas print of Melis kissing the dog on the nose. Gold script underneath reading, "First grandbaby." I scanned the whole thing twice. No wedding photo, no engagement announcement, not even a childhood picture of me. Not a single inch of wall space acknowledged that I had ever existed in this family. I swallowed the sting, let it settle deep. "Seems the dog made valedictorian, again," I said, eyes still on the canvas. Melis's voice wavered. "It's just tradition, honey. That wall's been there forever." I turned to her. Not with rage, but with precision. "So has your silence." She flinched slightly, but said nothing. I reached into my purse, pulled out the card, and walked to the hallway table. I placed it down gently. "I won't stay," I said. "This wasn't a visit. It was a confirmation." Then I left. Not a door slam, not a backward glance. Just the sound of gravel under my boots and a wind that had finally shifted direction. That evening, I pulled into Delora's driveway without calling first. The lights were on. She opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been waiting. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer pity. She just opened her arms, and I stepped into them. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quietly. "Not to them. Not to me." It was the kind of embrace you remember. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded you that some people know how to hold you without explanation. Later that night, I stood in my hallway with a hammer in one hand and a new photo in the other. Me and Delora at the wedding, arms linked, eyes laughing. I picked a spot on the wall above the bookshelf, marked it, and drove the nail in with 2 firm strikes. I hung the frame, not because I needed to fill the space, but because I was finally ready to start my own wall. The wall they built forgot me, so I started building one of my own. It had been a week since I hung the photo with Delora, and I hadn't touched social media in days. But that morning, something nudged at me. A thought. A whisper. Maybe it was time. Not to rage, not to beg, just to mark what happened with the kind of honesty that didn't need an apology. I opened Instagram, scrolled past filtered brunches and baby announcements, and found the photo I'd been avoiding. The one of me in my wedding dress, the sunlight catching just enough of the lace to make it glow. I cropped it slightly, making sure the 2 chairs behind me stayed visible. The name cards were still legible. Parents of the bride. I didn't add filters. I didn't touch up my face. I wrote the caption carefully. Respect was RSVP'd, but never showed. I hit post and put the phone down. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes, a quiet message or 2. But by noon, my inbox was flooding. Comments came in faster than I could read them. Some were shocked. Some shared their own stories. Some just wrote, "Thank you." By that evening, the photo had been reshared more than 1,000 times. Twitter caught it. Then Facebook. Someone made a side-by-side collage. Me in my wedding gown next to Bruno in his graduation cap. It wasn't cruel, it was devastating. People weren't laughing, they were angry. For me. By the end of the week, a producer from a local morning show reached out. "We'd love to have you on," she wrote. "Tell your story, if you're ready." Silas read the message with me, his arm wrapped around my shoulders. He didn't say much, just nodded and whispered, "If you want to, I'll be there." The studio was colder than I expected. Lights too bright, makeup heavier than I liked. But when the cameras rolled and the host leaned forward with her practiced sincerity, I didn't flinch. "What made you post that photo?" she asked. I looked straight into the lens. Not the host, not the audience, the lens. Because silence was never mutual, it was imposed, and I'm not carrying it anymore. They didn't expect that answer. You could hear it in the stillness that followed. We went to commercial, came back, and she offered the question I knew was coming. "Do you have an example of what happened?" I pulled a folded paper from my pocket. "My mother sent this message the morning of our wedding," I said, unfolding it slowly. "Bruno has his graduation today. He's worked so hard. We'll come by the next day." Gasps rippled across the audience. The host blinked rapidly, as if stalling. "They missed your wedding. For that." "They didn't miss it," I said, calm and clear. "They chose something else. Sometimes the truth doesn't need rage. It just needs a microphone." We closed with one final question. "What does family mean to you now?" I took a deep breath, glanced at Silas in the wings. "Family isn't about DNA. It's about presence. They chose theirs. I chose mine." Applause followed, not thunderous, but grounded. Real. When we stepped outside into the sunlight, a woman waiting near the studio door touched my arm gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "That wasn't just your story, it was mine too." I nodded. Didn't cry. Just squeezed her hand once. They never said I was wrong. But this time, I didn't need them to. The next morning, I turned off every notification. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wasn't. I'd said what needed to be said. There was nothing more to add. And yet, the world didn't seem done listening. Silas told me that afternoon, while I was restocking shelves at the shop. 3 million, he said gently. That's how many times the clip's been viewed. I blinked at him from across the counter. 3 million? He nodded. And counting. Messages poured in over the next few days. Some from strangers who shared stories eerily similar to mine. Some from people who just wrote, "I see you." A few from people I hadn't spoken to in years. High school friends, distant cousins. Not a single one from my parents. Not a missed call. Not a forwarded link. Just their absence, louder than ever. Then, one afternoon, Daria sent me a text. Just a screenshot. No commentary. Bruno was sitting proudly next to a box of high-end dog treats, his face featured on a new product line from a pet food company. "Gifted by Purity Pet Foods. Tjusker Family Champion," the label read. The caption was Colton's. "Proud of our boy. Real loyalty runs four-legged." They didn't deny my truth. They monetized theirs. I printed the image and taped it into the journal, opposite the photo of Silas and me under the wedding arch. I stared at the contrast. One side celebration born of love, the other of branding and noise. Beneath it, I wrote in pen, "They sent flowers to a dog. I got none, not even weeds." The following Sunday, I drove to their house. I didn't warn them. I didn't even check to see if they'd be home. I just needed to stand there one more time. The neighborhood looked the same. Cars parked neatly, lawns trimmed like they were afraid of judgment, the kind of quiet that had nothing to do with peace. Their car was gone. Bruno's leash was missing from the hook by the door. Another event, no doubt. Another gathering where he would be the grandchild who didn't talk back. I stood at the mailbox for a full minute before reaching into my bag. I pulled out a small envelope containing one photo, our wedding cake. On the back, I'd written, "You missed this. Again." I slipped it into the box and walked away. The windows of the house were pristine, the curtains perfectly parted. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit, the family that used to be. I didn't cry. I didn't shake, but I felt something slip from me on that sidewalk, like a string I'd been gripping too tightly had finally snapped. On the drive home, I took the long route. Not to stall, just to breathe. It was quiet on the back roads, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty but needed. I passed a small white building I'd seen 100 times but never noticed. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Support Group, Forgiving What You Can't Forget." I slowed the car, my foot hovering over the brake. But I didn't stop. I just looked. Once, twice, maybe one day, maybe not. But I knew something now, something simple. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was done waiting for apologies. They had left the door unlocked once. This time, I locked mine on purpose. That night, I didn't dream. I just slept, deep, uninterrupted, like my body had finally accepted there was nothing left to fight. When I woke, the sky outside was still silver. I made coffee slowly, deliberately, and pulled the blinds just enough to let in the light. There was no need to rush into the day. It would arrive either way. Later that afternoon, a package arrived on the doorstep. I hadn't ordered anything, and for a brief second, I thought maybe it was them. Maybe someone had remembered my existence in a tangible way. It was from Daria. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. "I made this for you, not for them. Sometimes we need to remember what we survived." I slipped the drive into my laptop and pressed play. The video wasn't long, 15 minutes, maybe less, but she had edited it with care. There was no dramatic music, no clever transitions, just raw moments. A shot of the chairs labeled "Parents of the Bride," still untouched. A close-up of my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted my veil. Silas, glancing at me with quiet steadiness. The soft applause when we kissed. There was no sound in parts, just stillness. I watched it once, then again. Not with a glass of wine, not through tears, just with breath and clarity. "It happened," I whispered. "And I was there, and I was enough." I didn't share the video. I uploaded it privately, unlisted, just for me. I didn't need comments or likes. I just needed it to exist somewhere outside my memory. 3 days later, a letter arrived. No return address. No handwriting on the envelope, just my name, typed in a simple font. Inside was a printed message. "I watched your interview. I cried. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was too familiar. Thank you for giving voice to what some of us never could." No name, no contact information, just validation. Sometimes strangers carry more of your heart than your own blood ever did. I held the letter for a long moment before slipping it into the drawer beside the wedding video and my vows. Later that week, a local women's group reached out. They had seen the interview. They wanted me to speak, share not just what had happened, but how I stood through it. At first, I said no. Then, the morning of the event, I woke with the sudden urge to go. Not for them, not even for me, but maybe for someone who hadn't found their voice yet. That night, before I left the house, I opened my journal and wrote, "I was not born to be the silence in someone else's memory." When I came home, I cleared out the drawer in the hallway cabinet. Inside, I placed 3 things: my handwritten vows, a printed still from the wedding video, the anonymous letter. Then I labeled it, for the version of me that forgot she mattered. I wasn't erasing them. I was finally outlining myself. 2 days after I labeled the drawer, I got tagged in a photo by a distant cousin I hadn't heard from since middle school. I almost ignored the notification, thought it was just another throwback post or baby shower picture. But my thumb hovered over the thumbnail long enough for the preview to pop. Maylise and Vernon standing on either side of Bruno. He was wearing another novelty outfit. This one a denim jacket with the words "Grandpup" stitched across the back in red thread. Behind them was a picnic table lined with balloons, plastic cutlery, and a cake shaped like a bone. The caption read, "Our precious grandpup, the light of our lives." No mention of me. No glance toward the daughter they raised. No recognition that days earlier had marked what would have been our first wedding anniversary. I didn't flinch, not anymore. But I did save the image. Not to stew in it, not to cry, just to remember. Not because I needed the reminder, but because sometimes clarity deserves a frame of its own. That evening, I sat on the edge of the couch while Silas prepped dinner. I showed him the photo. He didn't ask questions. He didn't scold. He just poured me a cup of coffee and handed it over with quiet understanding. "They made their choice," I said, fingers wrapped around the mug. "I'm just glad it wasn't mine." He nodded once, said nothing. He knew silence sometimes meant more than comfort. Later that night, I stood in front of the gallery wall in our living room, the one I'd started building not long ago, Delora and I smiling at the wedding, a candid of Silas laughing, a shot of the bookstore's grand reopening. I reached up and removed every photo from my childhood. Each one came off the wall like it had overstayed its welcome. I didn't throw them out. I wasn't angry. I was ready. In their place, I hung 3 new frames. The first held our wedding photo, just the 2 of us, silhouetted against the arch, the late sun warming our shoulders. The second, a picture taken beneath the oak tree behind our house. Silas was holding my hand. You could see Delora in the background, watching us with that proud, maternal softness she never tried to own, but always gave freely. The third frame was empty. Inside it, I placed a handwritten card that read, "To be filled by who shows up." I stepped back and stared at the arrangement. It wasn't symmetrical, it wasn't polished, but it felt right. Before bed, I returned to my journal, the one that had begun with receipts and slowly morphed into something else, a quiet catalog of becoming. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "You can't compete with a ghost, but you can choose not to become one." Then I closed the cover and locked the drawer. They made Bruno their legacy. I made peace mine. The afternoon sun poured through the kitchen windows like it had been invited. There was no official celebration planned, no anniversary, no birthday, no headline to warrant a gathering. But the house felt full in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. Delora brought a lemon cake from her church group. Daria showed up with a bottle of sparkling cider and a camera slung over her shoulder, always ready to capture something worth keeping. 2 of our neighbors, Clara and George, brought folding chairs and a potato salad that didn't need compliments to matter. And Jamie, the little girl I mentored at the community center, handed me a flower she'd picked herself, bent stem and all. We sat in a circle in the backyard, paper plates balanced on laps, light conversation dancing between sips and bites. No one asked why we were there. They didn't need to. "Because we showed up," I said at one point, raising my glass just high enough. And sometimes that's reason enough. Later, when the cake had been sliced and the dishes rinsed, I asked them to come inside. Just for a moment. In the living room, above the mantel, hung a new framed collage. I hadn't told anyone about it. I wanted them to see it all at once. In the center was a photograph from our wedding, Silas pressing a kiss to my forehead, the world around us soft and blurred. To the left, a picture from the reception. Delora mid-laugh, Jamie licking icing off her fingers, Daria blurry in the background, adjusting her lens. The 2 front chairs in the image were still empty, but no one noticed. Or if they did, no one said a word. To the right, I had printed the cover of my journal, enlarged it slightly, and placed it in a simple white frame. Across the front, in silver lettering, "This is why I chose peace." Beneath the collage, etched into a wooden plaque that Silas had helped me mount, were the words, "Even with empty chairs, I wasn't." Delora stepped forward first. She didn't speak. She just touched the frame lightly, nodded once, and sat back down. No one clapped. No one cried. The silence held everything. Legacy doesn't need permission. It needs presence. I never heard from Melis or Vernon again. Not a call, not a postcard, not even a digital thumbs up. I found out through Colton's feed that Bruno had earned a new agility title. There was a ribbon, a video montage, a proud caption. I unfollowed them all that night. Not out of spite, out of necessity. I wrote one last letter. Addressed it to no one. Just them. It was short. Thank you for not coming. You made space for the ones who did. I didn't mail it. I tucked it into the back of the drawer, where the old photos used to live. The following week, I stood outside the community center, the same one I had once passed by without stopping. This time, I wasn't there for therapy. I was there to speak. The flyer read, "When showing up means starting over." Underneath, in smaller print, "Speaker, Cynthia Hale." I took the microphone with steady hands. No shaking, no second guessing. I used to think healing was loud, I began. But sometimes, it's just quiet choices made one after another. Like choosing to show up. Like choosing to stop waiting for someone else to. There was no applause break, just a room full of nods, some silent tears. A woman in the front row mouthed, "Thank you." Sometimes you don't get the apology. You get the power to never need it again. I didn't frame them out of my life. I just stopped hanging their version of me.